The Quran provides general principles that are presented for sermonic and didactic purposes. This means, for instance, that its reference to historical circumstances and events should not be taken literally as constituting a factual record, but as being illustrations of the human condition. Moreover, as he points out, the preoccupation by classical commentators with the historical occasion when a particular verse was revealed, or asbabun nuzul, should not be allowed to obscure the underlying purpose of a verse and its relevance to the total message of the Quran. This is something he thought that they sometimes lost sight of in their explanations and unwarranted details to embellish the Quranic narrative. One needs to be clear about the Quranic perspective or the characteristic approach it takes to its subject matter and the inner relevance to the ethical teaching that the Quran propounds. He is of the view that in the interpretation of scripture, and especially of such narratives as the creation, one should be informed by insights from modern disciplines. This would be the basis for making such narratives comprehensible to people of the modern era. He emphasizes the rationality of Islam that went hand in hand with his intellectual approach to religion. This is in tandem with the approach of Muhammad Abduh, who developed a belief system based on reason. In the words of Abduh, religion must be accounted as a friend to science, pushing man to investigate the secrets of existence, summoning him to respect the established truth and to depend on them in his moral life and conduct. Muhammad Asad's hermeneutical quest to unlock the meaning of the Quranic text lies precisely in his contention that the Quran contains mythic material that should not be taken literally as accounts of actual historical incidents. What Muslims have to do is to step back and reflect on this material in the light of the underlying Quranic message as it is revealed in its ethical and social teachings. This task is made easier by the fact that the Quran places a lot of stress on reason, which is the key to understanding the meaning of its text. This means that every Quranic verse is directed to reason and therefore must be accessible to people who think. لِقَوْمٍ يَتَفَكَّرُونَ. The Quran tells us clearly that many of its passages and expressions must be understood in an allegorical sense for the simple reason that being intended for human understanding, they could not have been conveyed to us in any other ways. It follows, therefore, that if we were to take every Quranic passage, statement, or expression in its outward, literal sense, and disregard the possibility of its being an allegory, a metaphor, or a parable, we would be offending against the very spirit of the divine writ. Asad, to me, is a representative of Islam's humanistic and rationalist trend that would stand strong irrespective of time and place. Every generation faces different circumstances, and thus many laws and ways for society cannot be fixed for all time. This is why also the Quran only fixes timeless law, timeless laws, ethics, rights, and restrictions that are universal in its application. It is a constitution containing the basis for mankind's dealing with life. Everything outside the Quran is time-bound and must be reinterpreted by every generation to fit it to their circumstances. Asad maintained that this is the true sunnah, custom of the Prophet, a constant improving and developing society. And it is reason in particular, the main target of Quranic verses. It is akal which is the main target of Quranic verses, pointed out in countless Quranic statements and admonitions, time and again raised by Asad as the proper way that may lead us to a cognition of what is true and hence to faith. And so we are incessantly called upon to make the best possible use of our intellectual capacities to think, to observe God's visible creation, and to meditate upon the invisible one, and finally to endeavor to comprehend our own motivations as well as those of our fellow beings. The whole of the Islamic doctrine tells us, as it were, says Asad, think, and your reason will guide you to faith. Instead of assuring us, as some other religions do, gain faith, and through your faith, you will arrive at a comprehension of the truth. Wassalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you, Dr. Farooq. I'd like to now respectfully invite Professor Muhammad Kamal Hassan to deliver his lecture.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala ashrafil anbiya wal mursaleen. Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Subhanaka la ilma lana illa ma 'allamtana innaka antal alimul hakim. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wa hlul 'uqdatan min lisani yafqahu qawli. Dr. Farooq, as the chairman of this Islamic Renaissance Front, our respected guest and colleague, Dr. Tariq Ramadan, distinguished guests, scholars, friends, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum, and a very good morning to all of you. Within this short space of half an hour, I will try to highlight what I consider is one of the most important contributions of Asad, namely to articulate the perspective of Islam as a worldview, a kind of discourse that was initiated, I believe, by Iqbal, and then elaborated and expanded by Muhammad Asad, and later on impacted upon the thoughts of Maududi as well as Sayyid Qutb. But of course, all these people after him elaborated the notion of Islam as a worldview in their own ways and according to their own socio-political contexts. After his conversion to Islam in 1926, Asad devoted his life to the regeneration and revival of Islamic culture, state and civilization, after being repelled by the degeneration of the Muslim community and deeply perturbed by the quote-unquote religiously and socially disruptive newfangled ideas spreading in the Islamic world, westernization, secularism, nationalism, and materialism. I'm quoting from Ismail Nawab in his article, A Matter of Love, Muhammad Asad and Islam in Islamic Studies, volume 39, number 2, page 164, which I consider as the best article so far that I have read on the intellectual contributions of Muhammad Asad, in addition to the one by Murad Hoffman, who considers Asad as Europe's gift to Islam. Asad began writing as a committed Muslim in the early 30s, and a few years after meeting the celebrated poet-philosopher Muhammad Iqbal in British India, he came out with his very influential and I would say also a pioneering work, Islam at the Crossroads in 1934, which had a great impact on many educated Muslims around the world, and translated into Arabic as Al-Islam ala Muftaraq al-Turuq in 1946, it made a deep impression on the minds of several Muslim renewalist reformist thinkers such as Sayyid Qutb, Yusuf al-Qaradawi. And Muhammad Iqbal considered this book, quote, as an eye-opener. This widely read book, which carries a powerful message of Islamic renewalism and reformism, is described by his commentator and analyst, Ismail Nawab, as follows. And let me quote, it's quite a long quotation. Raising the banner of revolt against the intellectual, social, and political challenge posed by an ever-expanding Western Weltanschauung, the primary aim of Islam at the crossroads was to warn the Muslims against blindly imitating Western values and mores, which Asad thought posed a mortal danger to Islam. It had an authentic Iqbalian spirit and was an incisive, sweeping, and often a startling but refreshing response to a tide which had long flowed in favor of Western cultural and political hegemony. Moreover, it vivified a debate in progress on two of the fundamental concerns which exercise Muslim reformers: the perplexing problems of Westernization and Muslim revival, and the extent to which it was necessary for Muslims to follow the West's ways in order to achieve progress. End of quotation. Asad states in the book, and I quote from Asad, that Islam, unlike other religions, is not only a spiritual attitude of mind, but a self-sufficing orbit of culture and a social system of clearly defined features. Islam, says Asad, quote, not only teaches that all life is essentially a unity, because it proceeds from the divine oneness, but it shows us also the practical way how everyone of us can reproduce the unity of idea and action. Islam offers what Asad describes as a program of life, an expression shared by many later renewalist reformists. I think Maududi speaks of tasavvuri hayat in his writings, which also shares this idea of program of life, which does not require renunciation of the world, but in accordance with the divinely decreed rules of nature, achieves, quote, the complete coordination of the spiritual and material aspects of human life, unquote. The articulation of the unity and inseparability of the physical and the spiritual as a unitary explanation and natural basis of life evokes an important theme in Iqbal's projection of the Islamic conception of life, which is Islamic worldview, in his poetry and prose. The unity of the spiritual and the bodily is represented in the Islamic mode of prayer, which Asad describes in his book. This is an important aspect of the worldview of Islam, or conception of life, as explained in his 1934 publication, and I quote here, thus, the conception of worship in Islam is different from that in any other religion. Here it is not restricted to the purely devotional practices, for example, of prayers or fasting, but extends over the whole of man's practical life as well. If the object of our life as a whole is to be the worship of God, we must necessarily regard this life in the totality of all its aspects as one complex moral responsibility. Thus, all our actions, even the seemingly trivial ones, must be performed as acts of worship that is performed consciously as constituting a part of God's universal plan. The position of Islam in this respect is unmistakable. It teaches us first that the permanent worship of God in all the manifold actions of human life is the very meaning of life, unquote. The logical consequence of this conception of life, this worldview, this tasawwur, this tasavvuri hayat, or this ideology as used by Muhammad Nasir and also Hamka,